The room is hushed, the air thick with tension, and in the shadows of Buckingham Palace's gilded halls, a single truth is whispered, a truth so shocking that it threatens to undo decades of carefully crafted illusion. For as long as the world has known him, Prince Harry has been both a son and a question mark, a living contradiction of royal certainty and whispered suspicion. From the moment he entered the world, red-haired, bright-eyed, and spirited, the tabloids sharpened their pens and the whispers grew louder. Was he truly Charles's son, or the child of Diana's former lover, James Hewitt? For years, the palace dismissed such talk as rumor-mongering, cruel distractions from the duties of monarchy. Yet here, in the quiet of today's revelation, the story resurfaces with thunderous force, not as speculation, but as alleged proof. What would it mean to live your entire life under a cloud of doubt, never sure if the man you called father truly shared your blood? Imagine building your identity within one of the most rigid and scrutinized families on earth, where lineage is everything, only to discover a crack in the very foundation. That is the haunting reality presented now, as a palace insider has reportedly confirmed that DNA tests link Harry not to King Charles, but to James Hewitt, the cavalry officer who once captured Princess Diana's heart. And the moment this truth reached Harry, those present say he broke down in tears, overwhelmed by the weight of betrayal, grief, and unwanted vindication. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is not the first time the rumor has surfaced, but it is the first time insiders claim tangible proof exists. To grasp the scale of this story, one must rewind decades to the turbulent marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Diana, adored by the public yet deeply lonely behind palace walls, found comfort in the arms of James Hewitt during her unhappiest years. The world knows this much because Diana herself confessed to the relationship. What was dismissed as coincidence, Harry's resemblance to Hewitt, the timing of their affair overlapping in public imagination with Harry's birth, is now reignited under the harsh light of new evidence. If true, it is not simply a scandal, it is a rewriting of history. But what makes this revelation so powerful is not just the scandalous headline. It is the human cost. Harry has never been merely a royal. He has been the son of the people's princess, the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin at just 12 years old, the rebel prince who tried to carve out his own identity outside the suffocating traditions of monarchy. To imagine him now, hearing confirmation of the whispers that have haunted him for 39 years, is to imagine a man suddenly stripped bare. Every argument with his father, every cold glance from his brother, every act of defiance, does it now take on a new meaning? Did the family know all along? Was he the last to learn? These questions are not mere gossip. They cut to the very core of what it means to belong. The palace, of course, has always operated like a fortress, its gilded walls as much about protection as secrecy. For decades, staff and courtiers have gone to extraordinary lengths to maintain the image of stability, even as cracks showed beneath. If indeed this insider has spoken out, the timing could not be more dangerous. King Charles is already weathering storms, strained relationships with both sons, a monarchy struggling for relevance in modern Britain, and public sympathy increasingly directed toward Harry and Meghan's battles with the institution. To add a paternity scandal that strikes at the very heart of royal legitimacy is nothing short of catastrophic. The monarchy thrives on the concept of bloodline. Without it, the crown itself feels more fragile. Yet there is also an irony here. For years, Prince Harry has tried to redefine himself not by his title, but by his humanity. In his military service, in his campaigns for mental health awareness, in his determination to protect his wife and children from the very media machine that tormented his mother, Harry has shown a desire to be known for who he is, not what he represents. Now, in a cruel twist, his personal identity has become the world's obsession once more. The very thing he has sought to protect, his truth, his family, his sense of self, has been dragged into the open against his will. To understand the pain of such a revelation, imagine the betrayal of a secret kept for nearly 4 decades. If the palace knew and remained silent, Harry would feel not only deceived but manipulated. His life stage managed to protect the institution at the cost of his truth. If they did not know, then the chaos of learning alongside him is no less destabilizing. Either way, Harry becomes a tragic figure, a man trapped between two fathers, two truths, and two identities. But pause for a moment. Why now? Why would this revelation surface today when the royal family faces unprecedented challenges? Is this a leak carefully timed to wound Harry? Or is it an unavoidable truth that finally burst through years of silence? The answer may lie in the mounting tensions within the monarchy itself. As Charles navigates his reign and William steps closer to his destiny as king, Harry remains an unpredictable force. His memoir, his interviews, his critiques of the firm have already unsettled the palace. Perhaps, some might speculate, this revelation is not a coincidence at all but a weapon, a reminder that in the world of royalty, secrets are as powerful as crowns. The introduction of DNA evidence changes the game entirely. It transforms whispers into claims of fact, reshaping perception not just of Harry but of Diana herself. For those who idolized her as a saintly figure, the reminder of her vulnerabilities and choices cuts deeply. For others, it humanizes her all the more, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, reaching for affection wherever she could find it. But for Harry, this is not history. This is his life. It means grappling with the idea that his very existence is now headline fodder once again, his childhood memories reframed by a truth he cannot escape. Think about the pressure this revelation places on every relationship in his life. With Meghan, it deepens the sense that they are outsiders, carving their own path away from a family that may have concealed the greatest truth of all. With William, it strains the fragile bond of brotherhood, for William's legitimacy remains unquestioned while Harry's is dissected under a microscope. With Charles, it transforms the already complicated relationship between father and son into something far more tragic. What happens when the man you thought was your father is revealed not to be? Can love survive the shattering of blood ties? And then there is James Hewitt. For decades, he has denied being Harry's father, weary of the speculation. Yet his image has been forever entangled with Harry's in the public imagination. If the DNA claims are accurate, the weight of that denial now becomes unbearable. What would it mean for Hewitt himself, a man who once loved Diana, to step into the role of father to her son decades after the fact? Would he embrace the connection or recoil from the chaos it invites? The world will be watching closely, and the reactions will be fierce. There will be those who claim this revelation validates what they always suspected. There will be those who dismiss it as a ploy to undermine the monarchy. And there will be those who weep for Harry, recognizing that behind the grandeur of palaces and the spectacle of royalty is a man who has just had the ground pulled out from beneath him. This story is not about crowns or scandals alone. It is about identity, truth, and the fragile nature of belonging. It is about the pain of secrets kept too long and the devastation they bring when they finally surface. And it is about a son, grieving, searching, desperate, standing in the shadow of two fathers, uncertain of where he truly belongs. As this story unfolds, we will dive deep into its layers, the history of Diana and Hewitt's affair, the palace's denials, the sudden arrival of DNA evidence, Harry's emotional collapse, the monarchy's scramble to protect its image, and the global reaction to a revelation that could redefine royal history. But for now, remember this. Every crown rests on a story, and when that story cracks, the weight of truth can bring even the mightiest institution to its knees. The moment Prince Harry entered the world, he was not only born into royalty, but also into a storm of suspicion. It is rare for a newborn child to carry the weight of rumors, yet Harry did, before he could even take his first steps. The speculation began quietly, murmurs within palace corridors and whispered comments by journalists who were always searching for the next scandal that could grip the front pages. The idea that Harry might not be the biological son of Prince Charles was like a spark waiting to ignite. All it needed was the right fuel, and the press, relentless, ruthless, and fascinated with Diana's every move, was more than ready to supply it. From the earliest days, attention fixated not just on Harry's personality, but on his appearance. His bright red hair immediately set him apart. While many pointed out that red hair ran in Diana's family, the press insisted the resemblance was uncanny to James Hewitt, the cavalry officer Diana would later admit to having a romantic relationship with. The headlines didn't come outright in those early years. They came with insinuations, side-by-side photographs, and questions phrased with just enough ambiguity to avoid libel while planting doubt in the minds of millions. This tactic worked. The idea was seeded, and once it took root, it never truly left. But the true cruelty of this rumor was not simply in its repetition. It was in its timing. Imagine being a boy growing up in the shadow of a global spotlight, every misstep magnified, every smile photographed, every word analyzed. Now imagine that on top of it all, strangers whispered that your father might not be your father. Harry's youth was defined by contradictions, adored by the public, yet mocked by the tabloids. Cherished by Diana, yet treated by the institution as the spare to the heir. And in this cruel paradox, the rumor of James Hewitt cast a long shadow. For Harry, who lost his mother so young, the whispers about his parentage only deepened his isolation. Children who lose parents often cling to whatever fragments of memory they have, trying to build an identity out of the pieces left behind. But what happens when even those fragments are called into question? Every photo of him holding Diana's hand, every glimpse of Charles by his side, every holiday memory, were they built on a lie? This is the torment Harry grew up with, long before any alleged DNA revelation surfaced. It is why the rumor of James Hewitt was more than tabloid gossip. It was an assault on his very sense of self. Yet one must also understand the cultural climate of the time. The 1980s and 1990s were decades when the British tabloid press reached its peak of power and cruelty. Diana was their greatest obsession, and her every action was dissected for consumption. Her openness about her struggles, her mental health battles, her failed marriage, her yearning for love, made her a perfect target. When she admitted to her affair with James Hewitt, the story exploded. Even though Harry had already been born by then, the press made little effort to reconcile timelines or facts. What mattered was the story, and the image of young Harry with red hair became a prop for their narrative. Inside the palace, the rumors were both denied and feared. Denials came swiftly whenever the press grew too bold, but fear lingered because the royal family knows better than anyone how fragile the monarchy's legitimacy truly is. Bloodlines are its currency. The monarchy's power rests not on votes or laws, but on lineage, the unbroken chain of ancestry that stretches back centuries. If that chain were called into question, even for a single link, the entire institution could wobble. And Harry, by merely existing under suspicion, represented that fragility. The effect of this on Harry's character cannot be overstated. Those close to him often describe a boy with a rebellious streak, one who pushed against authority, challenged expectations, and sought to carve out his own path. It is easy to view that as youthful mischief or the temperament of a spare, but perhaps it was also a reaction to the constant whispers. When the world doubts who you are, rebellion becomes a defense. By misbehaving, by making headlines for the wrong reasons, Harry could control the narrative for once. Better to be known for wild nights in Las Vegas or careless remarks than to be pitted as the illegitimate son of a scandal. But there was another side to Harry too, a quieter, more wounded side. Those who saw him at Diana's funeral, walking silently behind her coffin, remember the image as one of the most heartbreaking moments in modern royal history. To lose his mother was already devastating. To then grow into adulthood with her affair being weaponized against him was salt in the wound. The question of his father became not just a matter of biology, but of legacy. Did he inherit Diana's rebellion, or Charles's restraint? Or was he destined to be forever defined by Hewitt's shadow? It is important to pause here and ask, why did the rumor persist for so long? After all, the palace repeatedly stated that Harry was born before Diana ever met Hewitt. Those close to Hewitt himself confirmed this timeline. And yet, the story refused to die. The answer lies in the allure of scandal. The truth was less exciting than the narrative. The idea that the royal family could harbor such a secret was irresistible, both to a public hungry for drama and a press eager for profits. Scandal sells, and nothing scandalized like the possibility that the son of the people's princess was not truly royal at all. In Harry's later years, particularly after his marriage to Meghan Markle, the rumor resurfaced with new intensity. The couple's decision to step back from royal duties made them villains in the eyes of some. heroes in the eyes of others. For critics, questioning Harry's legitimacy became a way to delegitimize his choices. For supporters, it was proof that Harry had been mistreated from birth, always made to feel like an outsider. The narrative, twisted as it was, served both sides. And so Harry, no matter what he did, could never escape it. The rumor followed him into every corner of his life. It was the uninvited guest at his wedding, the ghost hovering over his interviews, the hidden barb in every tabloid column. Even when he sought therapy and spoke openly about his struggles, the whispers lurked underneath. Was his pain simply that of a grieving son, or was it the deeper wound of a child who had been lied to his entire life? As we stand now on the brink of a new revelation, where DNA evidence is said to confirm the whispers, it is crucial to understand the depth of this shadow. This is not a story that sprang up overnight. It is the culmination of decades of speculation, pain, and manipulation. It is a story that shaped Harry before he even had the chance to define himself. And as the Palace Insider's words echo through the world, it is a story that threatens to break him once more. The shadow of speculation is long, and it has stretched across Harry's entire life. In this chapter, we see not just the beginnings of a scandal, but the formation of an identity forged in rumor. Harry has always been caught between truth and perception, love and betrayal, loyalty and rebellion. The alleged DNA revelation may bring answers, but it cannot erase the years of torment caused by whispers that never died. The shadow shaped him, and it is within that shadow that the next part of this story unfolds. To understand why the rumors of Prince Harry's parentage have clung to him for nearly 4 decades, we must return to the early 1980s, to the unraveling marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. At first glance, theirs was the fairy tale union that enchanted the world, a shy nursery teacher swept into the grandeur of royal life, marrying the heir to the throne in a dazzling ceremony watched by millions. But behind the shimmering veil of spectacle, cracks were already forming. Charles was still emotionally tethered to Camilla Parker Bowles, and Diana, barely out of her teens, was thrust into a world where love often took a back seat to duty. The loneliness that seeped into her life became unbearable, and in that isolation, Diana sought comfort elsewhere. It was during this turbulent period that James Hewitt entered the picture. A cavalry officer with charm, charisma, and a soldier's bearing, Hewitt was not part of the royal world, but became entangled with it through Diana's need for genuine affection. Their relationship blossomed quietly at first, in stolen moments far away from the prying eyes of palace courtiers. For Diana, Hewitt represented not just a man, but a sanctuary, a space where she could laugh, be vulnerable, and escape the suffocating coldness of her marriage. She would later admit candidly, in interviews and through confidants, that she loved him, a declaration that both humanized and scandalized her in equal measure. The timing of this affair would forever complicate Harry's life. Diana's openness about her romance with Hewitt, especially in the infamous Panorama interview, meant that the world now had a tangible figure to attach to the persistent whispers about Harry's red hair. Never mind that Diana herself insisted the relationship began years after Harry was born. The public, always eager for scandal, ignored the inconvenient facts. All they needed were photographs, Harry and Hewitt, side by side in the papers, their hair color matched, their smiles compared. A rumor was born, and like wildfire, it spread until it could not be extinguished. The affair itself became a fascinating chapter in Diana's life story. To the world, Diana was the people's princess, charitable, glamorous, and tragic. But to those close to her, she was also a woman desperately seeking validation. Hewitt provided that, at least for a time. Letters later revealed the depth of Diana's feelings, letters where she poured out her love, her longing, and her heartbreak when Hewitt was eventually unfaithful. Those private writings, exposed by the press years later, painted a portrait of a woman who had given her heart completely, only to have it shattered. Yet the press, rather than sympathize, exploited those words, using them to fuel the narrative that Diana's indiscretions had left a mark on the very bloodline of the monarchy. It is critical to understand how the royal household responded during this period. The palace was built to withstand scandal, but Diana was unlike any other royal before her. She spoke openly, she wept in public, and she confessed her struggles in ways that horrified the establishment. The affair with Hewitt was not just a personal matter. It was a public relations nightmare. Every detail had to be managed, controlled, or denied. In that management, the truth was twisted into something unrecognizable. While palace insiders knew the timelines, they also knew the damage perception alone could cause. The result was a clumsy balancing act. Deny the rumors outright, while doing little to erase the comparisons that tabloids gleefully exploited. But for Harry, the lasting consequence was more than reputational. It was existential. When Diana admitted to loving Hewitt, the seed of doubt about Harry's paternity became deeply entrenched in the public consciousness. Even though Diana was clear that the affair began after Harry's birth, the details were drowned out by the scandalous headline. And in the court of public opinion, headlines mattered more than facts. Harry's childhood, already complicated by a fractured family, became permanently entangled with a love affair that had nothing to do with him, yet defined him all the same. Consider the cruel irony of this. Diana sought love because she was denied it within her marriage. She found it, fleetingly, with Hewitt, and in doing so, exposed herself to relentless judgment. But her actions, rather than being viewed with compassion, were weaponized against her son. Instead of seeing a young boy grieving his mother, the public saw a child whose very existence became evidence in a case against Diana's fidelity. The gossip pages, week after week, ran photos of Hewitt and Harry side by side, each article subtly suggesting what they dared not declare outright. James Hewitt, for his part, has lived a complicated life under the weight of this rumor. For years he has denied being Harry's father, repeating in interviews that his relationship with Diana began after Harry was born. Yet his denials never carried the same force as the accusations. In the public imagination, the resemblance was enough. Hewitt himself became a tragic figure, known less for his military service or his own life, and more as the man who might have fathered Diana's child. He profited briefly from selling his story, and in doing so, fed the very machine that consumed him. In the end, he too was a prisoner of the affair, remembered less for who he was and more for the scandal he represented. The emotional weight of Diana and Hewitt's affair lies in the legacy it left behind. Diana was human, flawed, and desperate for connection, yet she was vilified for seeking what Charles had always taken elsewhere. Charles's affair with Camilla became accepted, even normalized over time. Diana's love for Hewitt, however, became a weapon against her and, more painfully, against her child. This double standard reflected not only the cruelty of the press, but the misogyny embedded in royal tradition. Men could err and recover. Women bore their mistakes like scars. For Harry, this meant growing up with his mother's choices thrown in his face as though they defined him. The palace may have hoped the whispers would fade, but instead they grew louder with each passing year. When Diana died, the narrative intensified. She had taken her secret to the grave, leaving the world to wonder endlessly about Harry's true paternity. It was a cruel twist of fate, one that ensured the rumor would never die because the one person who could speak most directly about it was gone. This chapter of the story is not merely about an affair. It is about the origins of a narrative that would follow Harry for life. Diana and Hewitt's love affair was private, complicated, and deeply human, yet its public consequences were immense. It offered the tabloids a weapon they wielded relentlessly, shaping public perception of Harry in ways that still echo today. The affair was never just about Diana seeking affection. It was about the monarchy's inability to contain the humanity of its most beloved member and the devastating impact that had on her son. Now, decades later, with alleged DNA evidence surfacing, the affair that once sparked whispers is being revisited as though it holds the key to Harry's identity. But what must not be forgotten is the human truth beneath the scandal. A lonely woman seeking love, a soldier offering comfort, and a boy who would one day grow into a man defined not by his own choices, but by the affair his mother could not hide. The story of Diana and Hewitt is not the whole truth of Harry's life, but it is the beginning of the shadow he could never outrun. And as we move deeper into this unfolding revelation, it becomes clear that the seeds planted by that relationship are now bearing fruit in ways neither Diana nor Hewitt could ever have imagined. The strength of the British monarchy has always rested on perception. For centuries, The crown has survived revolutions, wars, and scandals because it has been able to project an image of stability, continuity, and divine legitimacy. The family may quarrel in private, but in public, they move as one. Every smile is rehearsed, every wave measured, every statement carefully crafted to reinforce the idea that they are not merely people but symbols. In this light, the rumors about Prince Harry's paternity were not only a personal insult to him and his mother, they were a direct threat to the institution itself. From the very beginning, the palace was firm in its response. The claims were baseless. Spokespersons and courtiers moved swiftly to deny any suggestion that James Hewitt was Harry's biological father. Their argument was simple but powerful. The timelines did not match. Diana did not meet Hewitt until 1986, 2 years after Harry's birth. This fact was repeated often, almost like a mantra, whenever the rumor resurfaced. It became the cornerstone of the official narrative. The story was false, and the monarchy remained intact. And yet, denials in the royal world are never enough to stop speculation. In fact, they often do the opposite. Each time the palace rejected the claim, it gave the press a new opportunity to revisit it. Headlines would declare the denial, but side by side would appear photographs of Harry and Hewitt, inviting readers to make their own judgments. The very act of rebutting the story ensured it remained alive. And so, the official line, while meant to protect, often ended up amplifying the scandal. It is worth remembering how fragile the palace's position was during these years. The 1980s and 1990s were some of the most tumultuous decades for the royal family in modern history. Charles and Diana's marriage was in ruins, affairs on both sides were making front-page news, and the public's sympathy was shifting toward Diana, who was seen as the victim of a loveless union. In this climate, the suggestion that Harry was not Charles's son carried explosive implications. If true, it would mean that the monarchy's carefully preserved lineage was compromised. Even if false, the rumor undermined Charles's credibility as a husband and father. For the palace, silence was not an option. Denial became a necessity. But what happens when a denial feels too polished, too rehearsed? For many, the palace's repeated assertions seemed less like truth and more like damage control. The public had seen enough scandals to know that where there was smoke, there was often fire. And so, while officials insisted that Harry was indisputably Charles's child, the whispers continued. The palace could control its statements, but it could not control the collective imagination of the public. Inside those walls, the impact on Harry himself was often ignored. To the institution, he was both a beloved son and a symbol. His feelings, his confusion, his vulnerability, these were secondary to the need to maintain the royal image. Every time the palace issued a denial, they were not speaking to Harry, the boy. They were speaking to the world. For a child already growing up under unimaginable scrutiny, this must have been isolating. It meant that his life, his very identity, was reduced to a press strategy. Charles himself, though rarely speaking directly about the rumor, was caught in a complicated position. His marriage had collapsed under the weight of infidelity. His popularity suffered from his continued closeness to Camilla, and his relationship with his sons was strained. To publicly address questions of Harry's paternity would have been humiliating, yet to ignore them entirely would have been dangerous. Instead, he allowed the official line to stand. Harry was his son, end of discussion. But the silences in between spoke volumes. Charles was never a man known for warmth or public displays of affection. To the outside world, his coolness toward Harry seemed to confirm the doubts. The palace may have denied the claims, but Charles's demeanor often left the public unconvinced. Diana, on the other hand, carried the burden of those rumors in a much more personal way. She knew the truth of her own timeline. She knew that her relationship with Hewitt began after Harry's birth. Yet her honesty about the affair made it impossible for her to escape the consequences. Every admission she made, every tearful confession, was twisted into ammunition against her. When she declared in her interviews that she had loved Hewitt, it was as though she had handed the tabloids a permanent weapon. No matter how firmly she insisted on the dates, the image of her affair was stronger than the facts. And so, the denials from the palace, while technically true, were powerless against the tide of perception. For the monarchy, denial was more than just about defending Harry's paternity. It was about preserving the myth of royal perfection. The Windsors could endure affairs, scandals, and even divorces, but they could not endure doubts about bloodlines. A monarchy without certainty of lineage is not a monarchy at all. It becomes a story without a foundation. That is why the palace reacted so strongly. That is why every denial was repeated with such urgency. They were not just protecting Harry, they were protecting themselves. Yet one must ask, did the palace's strategy ultimately fail? By refusing to acknowledge Harry's pain, by treating him as a pawn in their public relations war, they deepened the divide between him and the institution. The denials may have shielded the monarchy, but they left Harry exposed. He grew up knowing that his life was fodder for headlines, that his very identity was up for debate, and that his family's response was to issue statements rather than comfort him. In many ways, this chapter of denials helped shape the man he would become, the rebel prince who distrusted the press, distrusted the palace, and eventually chose to walk away from it all. Even today, the legacy of those denials lingers. Each time the rumor resurfaces, the palace's past statements are dragged back into the conversation. People question whether the firm line of denial was a shield of truth or a wall of secrecy. The emergence of alleged DNA evidence now throws those old denials into sharper relief. If the insider's claims are true, then the palace's words were not just wrong. They were lies, calculated to protect the crown at the expense of Harry's right to know who he really is. And if they were telling the truth all along, then the fact that the public doubts them is proof of how deeply their credibility has eroded. The story of royal denials is not a minor footnote. It is central to the scandal. It shows us how the monarchy operates in times of crisis, not with transparency, but with carefully controlled narratives. It shows us the price of prioritizing image over honesty. And it shows us how a young boy's life can be overshadowed by a rumor the institution refuses to address with compassion. This chapter of denials does not end the story. It only sets the stage for the next revelation. For once denials have been issued, once lines have been drawn, what happens when new evidence emerges to contradict them? The answer is chaos. And it is into that chaos that Harry was thrust the moment the DNA claims surfaced, pulling decades of denials into question and threatening to unravel the very fabric of royal certainty. The whispers had lasted for decades, but whispers alone could be dismissed. They could be explained away as the cruelty of tabloids or the obsessive fantasies of those who despise the monarchy. But everything changed the moment the word DNA entered the conversation. For years, the royal family and their defenders had relied on one key defense: timelines. They insisted Diana had not even met James Hewitt until well after Harry's birth, and therefore the rumor was scientifically impossible. But now, if we are to believe the palace insider's claim, there is something more tangible, something irrefutable. DNA evidence has allegedly surfaced, and with it, the rumor leaps from speculation into the realm of proof. The impact of such a revelation cannot be overstated. The monarchy is built on blood. It is not a political party one can vote into power, nor is it a company where a board can appoint a leader. The authority of kings and queens rests entirely on lineage, the unbroken chain that stretches back centuries. To suggest that Harry was not Charles's son was always a scandal, but to say it could be proven with DNA was nothing short of revolutionary. Suddenly, every carefully crafted denial, every stern palace statement, becomes vulnerable to collapse. And at the center of it all stands Harry, a man who never asked for this truth, but now must live with it. According to the insider, the DNA results were obtained through samples quietly gathered and compared. The details remain murky, whether it was voluntary testing, covert collection, or evidence that had long been suppressed. But what matters is not the method, it is the claim. The palace insider insists the results link Harry directly to James Hewitt, not Charles. In an instant, the rumor transforms into an alleged fact, and the world looks at Harry differently. Imagine the moment Harry was told. Those close to him say he broke down, tears streaming, overwhelmed by the weight of something he had spent his entire life trying to ignore. For Harry, this was not a tabloid headline. This was the stripping away of certainty, the collapse of identity. To hear that the man who raised him, whom he had both clashed with and longed for love from, was not his biological father, is to experience a kind of grief more profound than death. It is the death of a truth he had always clung to, no matter how strained that truth had been. The psychological toll is immense. All of us build our identities on the stories we are told as children. Who our parents are, where we come from, the roots that anchor us to the world. When those roots are cut, when the very foundation of your life is pulled away, you are left adrift. For Harry, this meant reevaluating not just his relationship with Charles, but his entire existence within the royal family. Was he ever truly a Windsor? Did the institution see him as legitimate, or had they known the truth all along? These are not just questions of biology. They are questions of belonging, of purpose, of self. The ripple effects extend beyond Harry. For Charles, the revelation is devastating. To raise a boy as your own for nearly 40 years, only to have the world insist he is not truly yours, is a humiliation no king can easily endure. Even if Charles knew nothing of the DNA results until recently, his reputation is scarred. His coldness toward Harry over the years, his failure to show the same warmth he sometimes managed for William, will now be reinterpreted through this lens. Critics will ask, did Charles always suspect? Did he keep Harry at arm's length because he doubted his legitimacy? Whether true or not, the perception is damning. For William, the news is equally painful. The bond between brothers has long been tested, but this revelation drives a wedge deeper than any disagreement over Meghan or the monarchy. William remains the unquestioned heir, his legitimacy intact. Harry, meanwhile, becomes the outsider once again, now in the most literal sense. The contrast between them has never been sharper. One born to rule, the other allegedly born of scandal. How does a brother comfort another when their very bloodlines are said to divide them? Then there is James Hewitt himself, a man who has denied for years that Harry was his son. If the DNA evidence contradicts those denials, he is thrust into the spotlight once more, this time not as a subject of speculation, but as the alleged biological father of a prince. Does he step forward and accept this role, decades after the fact? Or does he continue to deny, leaving Harry caught between conflicting stories? Either choice brings chaos. For Hewitt, it is both a strange kind of vindication and a burden he may not want to carry. For Harry, it is another layer of confusion in a life already defined by contradictions. The public reaction is a storm. For some, this is vindication. They always believed Harry looked more like Hewitt than Charles, and now they feel proven right. For others, it is an attack on Diana's legacy, a cruel attempt to stain her memory by exposing her private choices. And for many, it is simply heartbreaking, because the boy they watched mourn his mother has now been forced to mourn the truth of his identity. Social media explodes, hashtags trend, commentators dissect the meaning of DNA in the monarchy, and beneath it all lies a single, unanswerable question. What now? The monarchy itself reels from the revelation. It is not only a family matter, it is a constitutional one. If Harry is not Charles's son, what does it mean for his place in the line of succession? Technically, nothing, because succession rules still list him. But symbolically, it is devastating. The monarchy depends on the illusion of purity, the idea that the crown passes through unbroken bloodlines. If that illusion shatters, so too does the public's faith. Every royal scandal chips away at the institution, but none strike at its heart quite like this. There is also the question of timing. Why now? Why would this evidence surface in the reign of Charles, at a moment when the monarchy is already fragile? Some suggest it is a deliberate leak, perhaps from those within the institution who wish to weaken Harry further, to punish him for his rebellion against the family. Others believe it is the inevitable result of secrets too heavy to remain hidden. Whatever the case, the timing ensures maximum damage, not only to Harry but to the monarchy itself. And what of Diana? Though she has been gone for decades, her presence looms over this revelation. For many, she remains untouchable, the people's princess who gave her heart to the world. But the DNA claim reopens wounds long thought healed. Her love for Hewitt, once confessed, now becomes the subject of renewed scrutiny. Did she know? Did she suspect? Was this her secret, carried silently to the grave? The tragedy is that Diana cannot answer. Her voice, silenced in 1997, leaves a void that the world will fill with speculation, whether true or not. This is why the DNA bombshell matters. It is not just about science or proof. It is about identity, belonging, love, betrayal, and the fragile architecture of monarchy. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that even in the most powerful families, secrets can fester for decades, that bloodlines are not always as unbroken as they appear, and that behind the titles and crowns are human beings grappling with pain the rest of us can only imagine. For Harry, this chapter is perhaps the most painful of all. To the world, DNA is data, a piece of evidence in a scandalous story. But to him, it is personal. It is the confirmation of every cruel whisper he endured, the proof that his life has been built on a lie. And as he sits with this truth, tears falling, the question becomes not whether the evidence is real, but how he will live with it. The human heart can endure grief, betrayal, even public humiliation, but the revelation of a hidden truth about one's own identity is an earthquake of a different kind. For Prince Harry, the alleged DNA confirmation that James Hewitt is his biological father did not just reopen old wounds, it ripped them wide apart. Those who were present when the insider revealed the findings describe a man unraveling in real time. Tears poured from Harry's eyes, not the tears of a momentary sadness, but of a lifetime's worth of pain collapsing onto his shoulders all at once. For Harry, the news was not just about bloodlines or headlines. It was about everything he had endured since childhood. The bullying in tabloids, the constant comparison to Hewitt, the awkward silences whenever the rumors surfaced, the stiff and rehearsed denials from the palace. All of it came flooding back. What he had fought to dismiss for years could no longer be ignored. Now it had weight. It had proof. It had finality. To cry in that moment was not weakness. It was release, a breaking point after decades of carrying questions no child should have to bear. Consider what it must feel like to question the man you have always called your father. Even in the most fractured relationships, a father is a cornerstone of identity. Harry's relationship with Charles was always complicated, marked by distance and a lack of warmth, yet it still formed part of who he was. To now confront the idea that Charles may never have been his biological father was like losing him twice. Once emotionally during childhood, and now biologically as an adult. No amount of palace statements or media spin could soften that blow. The tears, however, were not just for himself. They were for his mother. Diana had carried her pain under the gaze of millions, and now, even in death, her private life was once again weaponized. For Harry, who revered her memory, the thought that the love she sought in Hewitt had now been turned into evidence against him must have been unbearable. He wept for the loneliness that drove her into Hewitt's arms, for the silence that left him to grow up with unanswered questions, and for the impossibility of asking her now if any of it was true. Diana was gone, and with her went the only chance for clarity born of love rather than scandal. His breakdown also carried another layer: his children. Harry has fought relentlessly to give Archie and Lilibet a different life from the one he endured. His war with the press, his departure from royal duties, his interviews and memoir, all of it was, at its core, about protecting them from the shadows that haunted him. But now, how does he explain to them that his very identity, the foundation of their lineage, is under fire? Would they too grow up with whispers, taunts, and cruel speculation? Harry's tears were not just the tears of a son, but of a father fearing for the future of his own children. The emotional reaction also revealed itself in anger. Those close to Harry describe him as pacing, voice trembling, swinging between disbelief and fury. Who knew? How long had this truth been buried? Was the palace complicit in hiding it? Or was this as much a shock to them as it was to him? The lack of answers only fueled his torment. To be lied to by enemies is painful enough. To suspect you may have been lied to by your own family is devastating. Yet within the storm of grief and rage, there was also a profound sense of isolation. Harry has long felt like the outsider of the family, the spare who was treated as disposable. This revelation intensified that loneliness. Where William had the comfort of certainty, Harry had only doubt. Where the monarchy presented Charles as the devoted father of an heir and a spare, Harry was now left to wonder if he had ever truly belonged at all. His tears, then, were not just for the present revelation, but for a lifetime of exclusion that now seemed explained by a single devastating truth. Psychologists often speak of identity crises as moments when the story we tell ourselves about who we are no longer fits with the facts we discover. For Harry, this was the ultimate identity crisis. Every chapter of his life had been shaped by the assumption of being Charles's son, Diana's boy, a Windsor by blood. Now, with DNA allegedly saying otherwise, the story collapsed. His tears marked that collapse. The painful recognition that he no longer knew who he was in the simplest, most primal sense. And still, amid the heartbreak, there was resilience. Harry's life has been defined by survival. He survived the death of his mother at 12. He survived the brutal glare of the press as a teenager and young man. He survived the scrutiny of marrying Meghan and the fury that followed their departure from royal life. His tears in this moment were not a sign of defeat, but a necessary step in that survival. To cry was to acknowledge the pain. To acknowledge the pain was to begin processing it. And in processing it, Harry could begin, however slowly, to reclaim his sense of self. Witnesses say that after the tears, there was silence, a long, heavy silence where Harry simply sat, hands over his face, unable to speak. That silence says as much as the tears. It was the silence of a man realizing his life had been rewritten, that the past he thought he knew no longer existed, and that the future he imagined for himself and his children would be haunted by this revelation. It was the silence of grief, but also of reckoning. The emotional reaction did not end in that room. In the days that followed, Harry reportedly withdrew, speaking only to Meghan and a few trusted confidants. The weight of public expectation, the inevitability of headlines, and the coldness of the palace response left him adrift. Yet those tears, raw and unguarded, spoke more than any statement could. They revealed the human cost of secrets kept too long, the devastating impact of truth revealed too late, and the unrelenting pressure of being both a prince and a man searching for himself. Harry's emotional reaction is not just a chapter in a scandal. It is the heart of the story. It shows us what is truly at stake. Not just the monarchy's image or the palace's denials, but the soul of a man who has spent his life caught between duty and truth. His tears are a reminder that behind every headline is a human being, and behind every scandal is a wound that may never fully heal. The Palace Insider's revelation did not remain confined to hushed conversations within gilded walls. It exploded outward, carried first in whispers, then in headlines, until it became the only story on everyone's lips. The confirmation of what had once been dismissed as cruel rumor now electrified the public. The world woke up to the words DNA proof and James Hewitt connection. And suddenly the question that had hovered for decades was no longer a distant murmur, it was a front-page scream. The shock was immediate. Across Britain, households erupted in conversation. In cafes, on trains, in offices, people leaned toward one another, speaking in low voices or loud disbelief. For many, it was a moment of vindication. They had always suspected Harry was Hewitt's son, and now, at last, they felt proven right. Old pub debates, jokes whispered cruelly in tabloids, speculative columns, all seemed to have been confirmed in one brutal stroke. But for others, the shock carried something more painful, grief for Harry himself. They saw in him not a scandal, but a man betrayed by the very people meant to protect him. In the newspapers, editors seized on the story with ruthless efficiency. Side-by-side photographs of Harry and Hewitt filled the pages once more, accompanied by bold captions asking readers to compare for themselves. The red hair, the jawline, the smile, all became forensic evidence in the court of public opinion. Broadcast news replayed footage of Diana speaking about her love for Hewitt, juxtaposed with images of Harry in tears at public events. Social media, that vast amplifier of opinion, exploded. Hashtags trended worldwide, some mocking, some sympathetic, some demanding answers from Buckingham Palace. In the digital age, no story dies quietly. This one ignited like a bonfire, impossible to contain. The global reaction was equally intense. In America, where Harry and Meghan had already built a new life, networks debated the implications not just for the monarchy, but for Harry's personal story. In Europe, commentators reflected on what this meant for the enduring myth of royal bloodlines. In Australia, Canada, and the Commonwealth at large, where loyalty to the crown has often been lukewarm. The revelation sparked questions about the legitimacy of a monarchy that had always presented itself as the unbroken chain of ancestry. If the chain was already cracked, why preserve it at all? But the shock was not uniform. For many, the revelation reopened old wounds tied to Diana herself. She had been dead for nearly 3 decades, yet her shadow loomed larger than ever. To revisit her affair with Hewitt was to revisit her pain, the loneliness that drove her to him, the lack of love in her marriage, the constant scrutiny that left her desperate for affection. Some wept not for Harry alone, but for the mother he lost, imagining how she might have shielded him had she been alive to tell the truth in her own words. The thought that her memory was once again dragged through tabloids brought sorrow to those who had never stopped mourning her. At the same time, the revelation sharpened divides in public opinion. There were those who blamed Diana, accusing her of recklessness and betrayal, painting her as the architect of Harry's misery. Others turned their anger on Charles, whose coldness was now reinterpreted as suspicion. Had he known? Had he always believed Harry was not his? Still others looked at the monarchy as a whole, accusing the institution of complicity. If insiders had known the truth and buried it for decades, then the scandal was not just personal, it was systemic. Harry's supporters, particularly in America, rushed to defend him. For them, this revelation explained everything. His mistrust of the press, his decision to step away from royal duties, his fierce protection of his wife and children. They saw in Harry not a fallen prince, but a survivor, someone who had endured more than most and still fought to build a life on his own terms. To them, the DNA revelation was not a scandal, but a tragedy, a cruel twist that proved Harry had always been the outsider. Meanwhile, critics weaponized the story against him. They argued that Harry, already estranged from his family and critical of the monarchy, now had even less claim to the privileges he had once enjoyed. Online forums and television pundits sneered that perhaps he had never truly belonged, that his defiance was not courage but resentment born of illegitimacy. For these voices, the revelation was not a reason for sympathy, but justification for rejection. The shock reverberated inside the palace as well, though their reaction was less public. Courtiers scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing cautious statements that avoided acknowledging the DNA directly but emphasized family unity and support for the Duke of Sussex. Yet the silence beneath the words was deafening. The public sensed hesitation, and in that hesitation, they smelled guilt. If the palace had nothing to hide, why not speak more clearly? The official line, once enough to quiet speculation, now seemed brittle against the roar of public opinion. For ordinary citizens, the story sparked reflection beyond the monarchy. People asked themselves what they would do if faced with the same revelation. How would it feel to discover your father was not who you thought? To realize your family had hidden such a truth? These questions, intimate and unsettling, drew the public closer to Harry's plight. It was no longer just a royal scandal. It was a human story, one that resonated with anyone who had ever doubted their place in their family or questioned the stories they were told as children. Yet there was also a hunger for spectacle. Television specials were commissioned, documentaries hastily assembled, podcasts dedicated to dissecting every angle. The story became entertainment, consumed by millions who were fascinated by the drama even as it tore apart Harry's private world. This is the cruelty of modern celebrity. One man's anguish becomes another's evening diversion. The shock that gripped the public was not just empathy, but voyeurism, a desire to peer into the most painful corners of Harry's life. As the days turned to weeks, the initial shock began to settle into something deeper: division. Those who sympathized with Harry became more vocal in their defense. Those who resented him became more emboldened in their attacks. And in the middle of it all was Harry himself, a man whose tears had already been seen by the world, now forced to live with the reality that his personal truth was no longer personal at all. The public shock was never just about paternity. It was about trust. If the monarchy could keep such a secret for so long, what else had they hidden? If Harry could be deceived about something as fundamental as his own bloodline, then what did that say about the institution he was born into? These questions lingered long after the headlines faded, leaving a monarchy weakened, a public divided, and a prince more isolated than ever. In every family scandal, there are those who speak loudly, and those who remained silent. In the unfolding storm of Harry's alleged DNA revelation, Prince William chose silence. Yet silence is not absence. It is weight. It is presence. It is the unsaid words that echo louder than any statement. For the public, William's lack of comment became a story in itself. For Harry, it became another layer of anguish. And for the monarchy, it revealed the delicate balance between brotherhood and duty, love and loyalty, silence and truth. William has always been cast as the heir, the steady hand, the dutiful son who would one day take the throne. From childhood, he bore the weight of expectation, while Harry was seen as the freer spirit, the one who could make mistakes. Yet this division, this labeling of heir and spare, was never simply about roles. It shaped their relationship profoundly. Where Harry sought freedom, William carried responsibility. Where Harry rebelled, William complied. But beneath those differences lay a bond forged in grief, a bond that was visible to the world the day they walked side by side behind Diana's coffin. They were two boys against the world, united by loss, tethered by shared pain. Now, decades later, that bond faces its greatest test. For William, the DNA revelation does not only affect Harry. It reverberates through the entire monarchy. As heir, his duty is to preserve the institution, to protect the crown from scandal. As brother, his duty is to protect Harry. These duties now clash violently. To defend the monarchy may require distancing from Harry. To defend Harry may require undermining the monarchy. The silence William has chosen is perhaps the only way he knows to navigate this impossible tension. But silence is not neutrality. It is a choice, and one that leaves Harry exposed. Behind closed doors, William's struggle is said to be immense. How do you comfort a brother whose identity has been shattered, while also knowing that acknowledging his pain could destabilize the crown you will one day inherit? It is an unbearable position, one that forces William to suppress his personal instincts in favor of royal duty. Sources close to him suggest he feels torn. His love for Harry still exists, buried beneath anger and estrangement, but the weight of kingship demands restraint. To say nothing is safer, but to say nothing also feels like betrayal. The silence also speaks to deeper wounds between the brothers. Their relationship has been strained for years, worsened by Harry's departure from royal duties and the public accusations he and Meghan made against the family. Trust, once fragile, has been shattered. Into this brokenness comes the DNA revelation, a truth so explosive it could have brought them together in shared grief, but instead drives them further apart. For Harry, William's silence may feel like abandonment at the very moment he needs him most. For William, speaking may feel impossible, for anything he says will be dissected as either betrayal of the crown or betrayal of his brother. The public, watching this unfold, interprets William's silence in different ways. Some see it as dignified restraint, proof that he is ready to be king by refusing to fan the flames of scandal. Others see it as cold indifference, a sign that he prioritizes the crown over his own brother's suffering. This divide mirrors the very tension William himself lives with. To some, he is the dutiful heir. To others, he is the distant brother. And in both roles, he is trapped. But what does William feel privately? To imagine his silent struggle, we must consider his own identity. William grew up under the same shadow of speculation that haunted Harry, but he was never the target of it. He was always the secure one, the son whose legitimacy was unquestioned. This certainty, however, carried its own burden, expectation. He knew from the moment he could understand that his future was not his own. He would be king. He would inherit the crown. And so, while Harry's life has been defined by doubt, William's has been defined by inevitability. Both are prisons of a kind. Both are forms of suffering. Now, watching his brother collapse under the weight of DNA claims, William must feel the collision of these two fates. He is the legitimate heir, yet his brother may not even share his father's blood. He is secure in his destiny, yet powerless to shield his brother from pain. He carries the crown's continuity, yet that very continuity deepens Harry's isolation. In this paradox, William suffers silently, his struggle invisible but profound. Consider, too, the memory of their mother. Diana's love for her sons was fierce, equal, and unwavering. She wanted them to see each other not as heir and spare, but as brothers, bound in loyalty. The DNA revelation desecrates that dream. It pits them against each other not by choice, but by circumstance. For William, who has always carried the role of protector, the thought that he cannot shield Harry from this truth must be agonizing. He may remain silent publicly, but privately, the grief of failing his mother's wish surely weighs heavily. The question that hangs over William is whether his silence can last. The world demands answers. The press probes endlessly. Harry's pain is visible, and William's absence is stark. Can he continue to say nothing without losing his brother forever? Can he speak without endangering the monarchy he is sworn to uphold? These are the questions that define his silent struggle. They reveal the impossible bind of being both a man and a symbol, both a brother and a king in waiting. William's silence also highlights a painful truth about the monarchy itself. It does not allow for humanity. In any other family, a brother would rush to comfort his sibling, no matter the scandal. But in this family, love is filtered through duty, emotion through protocol. The crown demands silence where the heart demands speech. And so William, like so many royals before him, must sacrifice personal bonds at the altar of image. His struggle is not only with Harry. It is with the very institution that has shaped and constrained them both. The silent struggle of William is therefore not an absence in the story, but a central theme. It shows us the collateral damage of monarchy, the way it forces impossible choices on those born into it. It reveals how scandal does not just break individuals. It fractures families, sets brother against brother, and silences love in the name of duty. For Harry, the silence is another wound. For William, it is another burden. And for the monarchy, it is another sign of the human cost of maintaining an image that can never align with reality. As the world debates Harry's DNA, William's silence becomes louder each day. It is the silence of a man torn between roles, torn between truths, torn between love and loyalty. It is the silence that speaks to the heart of this scandal, not just a question of who fathered a prince, but of how a family can survive when the truth is both unbearable and undeniable. When the alleged DNA evidence surfaced and whispers transformed into declarations, one figure found himself at the very center of the storm: King Charles. More than anyone else, the revelation placed him in an excruciating position. He was not merely implicated as the father whose paternity was being questioned. He was the monarch, the embodiment of the institution that depends entirely on the sanctity of lineage. And so, the DNA claim struck Charles on two fronts: personally as a man and publicly as a king. Both blows cut deep. For decades, Charles had endured speculation about Harry's paternity with a mixture of frustration and silence. His response was always the same: ignore the rumors, allow official palace denials to do their work, and carry on with the duties expected of him. Yet behind that outward composure lay something darker. Charles, already a man perceived as cold and emotionally distant, was not skilled in affection. His relationship with Harry had always been strained, defined more by distance than intimacy. To now be told that the boy he raised might never have been his own was a cruelty that could not be disguised by royal poise. What must that knowledge have felt like? Imagine raising a child through the turbulent years of adolescence, watching him stumble, rebel, and then find his own path, only to be told that he does not carry your blood. Even if Charles suspected nothing until the insider's claims, the humiliation was immense. To the public, it suggested that he had been deceived, cuckolded by Diana, and forced to play a role in a drama that mocked the very idea of royal legitimacy. For a man who waited decades to be king, this was a scandal with the potential to taint his reign before it had even fully begun. Charles's predicament was made worse by the fact that his own past was already stained with scandal. His decades-long love for Camilla, carried on while married to Diana, had defined his public image as the unfaithful husband. Diana's Panorama interview in 1995 had painted him as a man unfit to love, let alone rule. Public sympathy had shifted decisively toward Diana, and Charles had spent the years since clawing back a semblance of respectability. But with the DNA revelation, the sins of the past returned with a vengeance. Now the narrative was not just of a man who betrayed his wife, but of a man who might have raised the son of his wife's lover. Inside the palace, Charles's reaction was described as fury and devastation in equal measure. Fury at the leak. How could such information have escaped the tight grip of the crown's protectors? Devastation at what it meant for Harry, for Diana's memory, and for his own dignity. As king, Charles's every move is scrutinized, his words dissected. To address the DNA claim would give it power, to ignore it would appear cowardly. Trapped in this paradox, Charles retreated into the only strategy he knew: silence cloaked in official statements, carefully worded to deflect without engaging. But the public was not satisfied. They saw Charles's aloofness not as dignity, but as indifference. Every photograph of him standing stiffly beside Harry in the past was reinterpreted as evidence. Had he always known? Every rumor of his coldness toward Harry was magnified. Was this why? Did Charles keep Harry at a distance because he doubted him? The narrative spiraled, and Charles, already unpopular in comparison to Diana, found himself cast once more as the villain of the story. The emotional dimension of this scandal was just as sharp. However strained his relationship with Harry, Charles had still been a father. He had still walked with him, traveled with him, advised him, even clashed with him. Fatherhood is not merely about biology. It is about presence, however imperfect. And now, that fatherhood was being ripped away in the public imagination. For Charles, this was not just a loss of dignity, but a loss of identity. What does it mean to be a father when the world insists you are not? What does it mean to be a king when the truth of your family is questioned? The crossfire Charles endured extended beyond personal humiliation. Politically, the monarchy depends on stability. Any scandal involving the king undermines that stability, and this scandal was unlike any other. It was not about money, or politics, or even affairs. It was about blood, about the very foundation of monarchy. If Charles could not even claim to be the father of his second son, what did that say about the crown's legitimacy? What did it say about the image of the Windsor family as the unbroken line of Britain's rulers? The timing was especially cruel. Charles had finally ascended the throne after the death of Queen Elizabeth, the longest reigning monarch in British history. His reign was supposed to be a time of continuity, of guiding the monarchy into the modern age while preserving tradition. Instead, it became a reign immediately overshadowed by scandal. To have his legitimacy as a father questioned just as he was establishing his legitimacy as a king was a wound that could not be disguised. There was also the matter of public memory. Diana's supporters, who never forgave Charles for the breakdown of their marriage, seized on the revelation as poetic justice. To them, Charles was now humiliated in the same way Diana had been humiliated. The whispers that Harry was Hewitt's son became less a scandal and more a narrative of Diana's quiet revenge. But to those who supported the monarchy, it was a nightmare. If Charles could not protect his own family from such rumors, how could he protect the monarchy itself? Privately, Charles's relationship with Harry seemed doomed to further strain. Already wounded by Harry's memoirs, interviews, and accusations against the family, Charles now faced a son whose very existence was being called into question. The opportunity for reconciliation shrank further. How do you embrace a son who the world says is not yours? How do you prove love when biology, and the public's perception of it, threatens to erase it? These were the questions Charles faced, and in the crossfire of scandal, there were no easy answers. The tragedy of Charles in this story is that he is both victim and villain. Victim of rumors he cannot control, of a past he cannot rewrite, of a wife whose love he never fully secured. Villain in the eyes of the public who see in his coldness the confirmation of guilt. Stuck between these roles, Charles becomes the embodiment of the monarchy's fragility, powerful in appearance, powerless in truth. As the DNA claims echo through the halls of Buckingham Palace, Charles stands in the crossfire, attacked from all sides. By the public who demand answers. By the press who see scandal as profit. By Diana's memory, which haunts him still. By Harry, whose pain reflects the failures of fatherhood. And by the institution itself, which depends on him to preserve an image already crumbling. His reign was meant to represent stability after the turbulence of the Diana years. Instead, it begins with the same wound that defined those years, the question of who Harry truly belongs to.